As I mentioned, that Palestinians have been so dehumanized in history. So if a Japanese 12-year-old can look at a Palestinian 12-year-old and think of them as a human being just like themselves, I think that's really wonderful. It's an act of profound anguish. It's an act of deep grief, and it's an act of powerlessness. Parents, Palestinian parents don't want their children to become just statistics. They, at least in death, they could be named. And I think that's some of the reasons they were doing that. I mean, it's just a horrible thought. I wanted to think about what what the children, what their reaction is to the fact that their parents were writing their names on their legs, and their arms. And I just wanted to explore what what the children might be thinking and feeling. I wanted to kind of lift up a child's voice, a child's, you know, understanding of the war. Everything dealing with Palestine is political. But I really didn't, that wasn't my original intent. My original intent was really to explore about the children and to give the children some kind of voice. What was their understanding? Like I said, how did it make them feel? What was it teaching them about war? And, I just think of this not as a political poem. I think of it as a humanistic poem. A child who's in the middle of experiencing a very horrible war. I wanted to express my own horror about the situation and and to show the world the injustices happening in Gaza and especially happening to the children. I mean, like I said, I'm delighted the school chose to bring Palestine to their students. I'm really appreciative that the administrators and the teachers at that school have made this decision. The fact that it's in an exam setting, well, I mean, for one thing, it tells me that the students have got to really read this poem closely and really understand what it's about. And that's great. I want people to, read it closely and to understand it. But I hope that the stressful aspect of the exam, that they really like read the poem and read it for what it is and appreciate it for what it is and not as just like a performance indicator, you know what I mean? As I mentioned, that Palestinians have been so dehumanized in history. So if a Japanese 12-year-old can look at a Palestinian 12-year-old and think of them as a human being just like themselves, I think that's really wonderful. And I don't mean just Palestinians. They can, look at people from Uganda or people from Venezuela or whatever. I think it's really important for children to have that sensibility to connect with people from all over the world. It's about respecting the humanity of other people. And so I think 12 years old is young, but it's not too young to introduce a lot of these concepts. And these are smart and curious young students, and I think it's really a great time to be introducing them to world affairs and to the concepts of human rights.
There was a Jewish community. So coexistence was there in Palestine before Israel. There were Jewish people, there were Christians people, there were Muslim people. So both my great-grandparents and my grandparents on my father's side, they were expelled from Jaffa in 1948, and they died in the refugee camp. That's the same refugee camp where I was born. That's where my father was born. That's where all his siblings were born. That's where most of my siblings, my own siblings, were born, in Ashati refugee camp in Gaza City. So I was born there. Then during Israel's attack on Gaza in December 2008, January 2009, I was 16 years old. I was wounded in an Israeli airstrike. I was 16 years old again. I was a child. So in 2009, in January 2009, I was wounded in an airstrike. And that airstrike killed 7 other people. 3 pieces of shrapnel penetrated my body. 1 penetrated my neck here, as you can see here. I mean, just imagine, I mean, when we say a refugee camp is supposed to be a temporary place, a shelter, you know, until the conflict is over. But the Palestinian people have been living in Gaza in 8 refugee camps, and there are more in the West Bank, and there are more in Lebanon, there are more in Jordan, there are more in Syria. So these people have been living in refugee camps, even though the building in the refugee camp, you know, differed from time to time, because people have been living there for 77 years. 77, I mean, just imagine you are living in a refugee camp for 77 years. I mean, what I want to tell you is that all my life, I'm one person, and that's the story of so many other people. Mm-hmm. My life has been the life of someone who's not living day by day, but someone who is trying to survive day by day. Because there is a difference between living a life and trying to survive a life. And that's the life that is caused by the Israeli occupation and also by the complicity of many countries in the world. And also the injustices that have been caused by the international community. Another very important refugee camp in my story is the Jabalia refugee camp, mm-hmm. which is in North Gaza. That's where my mother was born. Mm-hmm. And that's a refugee camp just by car. It would be about 10 minutes away from Beit Lahia, where I used to live after I turned 8. So that's another very, very important refugee camp in our story. That's where my mother was born, all her siblings. And that's where we sheltered for a few days after the October 7th attack. So we left our house in Beit Lahia. 4 weeks after October 7th, it was bombed. And I swear to God, I have never seen something like that. An entire block. I mean, you cannot distinguish a house from a house because everything was leveled, and sometimes it was a big crater, a big hole that the houses of the refugee camp were buried under. My experience is that of a refugee, the son of a refugee, the grandchild of refugees, someone who lost family members, someone who was wounded in airstrikes, someone who hopes and who demands, you know, his right to be free in his own country. So I don't think there is any political dimension to my writing. I would say that my experience as an individual, my name is Abu Toha, my experience as an individual is not a unique experience. And I mean here that I'm not the only Palestinian who have gone through the difficulties and who survived many Israeli airstrikes. So I'm not the only Palestinian who has survived. I'm not the only Palestinian who was a victim of the Israeli military campaign on Gaza, the genocide. I'm not the only Palestinian who was born or lived in a refugee camp. My story is the story of so many people, some of whom were killed, some of whom survived, some of whom may not survive, unfortunately, as long as the Israeli occupation continues. So I was born in a refugee camp. And it's very important to note, this, that I was born in a refugee camp